All right, good morning, Steve. The timing for this conversation could not be better. I know that you're traveling, so where are you today?
I'm at it's probably the best cancer policy meeting of the year. And it's called the AVBCC. It's value-based cancer care. And everybody's here. It's in New York, but ironically, it's at the New York Athletic Club. And I was trying to find a quiet spot. You wouldn't believe there's actually a library here. So it's quiet is the good news, but I'm also trying to talk a little bit quietly because there is this library on the 9th floor of the New York Athletic Club. Go figure. So that's where I am.
Fantastic. Well, it's always a pleasure to have a conversation with you. So we are in a moment of volatile policy uncertainty, and biotech financing hit 20-year lows this year. And the stark reality, when I was doing some research, the stark reality is that 90% of biotech startups fail. And clinical success rates for biotech originated candidates is about 7%. So I don't envy your position as a CEO. So you shared with me some, as you call them, pot shots. So let's start with one of them that really caught my attention. Never work for a first-time CEO and never be a first-time CEO. There's clearly irony here since many biotech CEOs are first-timers. So what's behind this quote?
I think there's therapy there more than irony, but I think it just talks to how difficult it's sort of like if you ever watch the Master and Commander movie, you just think about navigating your ship. There's enemies out there. There's all things that Russell Crowe has to deal with. There's a lot to managing a 17th century vessel, and there's a lot to managing a biotech too. So, whatever piece you don't already have experience in is going to hurt you. Whatever Russell Crowe didn't know about the enemy vessels there, or the maps or the journey, his experience is going to hurt him. So, there's never a perfect time to be a CEO because you really do need to have that experience. So a bit of a tongue in cheek, and I think it just speaks to the importance of what we're doing, but also that what we have to do to bring together a team to develop an effective campaign. It takes luck, it takes persistence, and it takes experience.
So what did you learn as a CEO that you could not have known before taking this role?
My first CEO experience was about 2008-9. What is that now? 16 years ago. And it was building a CRO, a services business for pathology. Now we call that pathology AI, but back then it was just called, let's stop looking at glass microslides and instead do something virtual. And since then, this whole industry's grown up since there. But that was, I think one of the things I learned is how do you build you have to build a good board, and you have to build a really good management team, and then as well as the vision and knowing what the company's doing and raising money. And you don't teach how to build a management team or manage a board when you're in Apple. Those are things you just have to figure out as you do it.
So I work with startup CEOs across several industries, but I feel like the biotech CEO role is particularly unforgiving for first-timers specifically. What do you think makes it particularly unforgiving?
Any role with a lot of responsibility is unforgiving. Anything where you have a significant task to do and you don't do it, is unforgiving. But there's macro environment things that hit you, and then there's also things you can control. A lot of times, one of the reasons it's so unforgiving is because we do these single shot companies where, you have one drug and you're working that drug through, and then if that fails, you're kind of done. And saving is because not spending enough time thinking a priori about the risks. And one of the risks is having really a single shot programs where, it's maybe another analogy. Think about the NFL and think about, this probably shows my age, Julian, but you think about the difference between a Peyton Manning that went out for the first pick and a Ryan Leaf that went out second. And if you go back and look at analysts, there's a lot of people that thought Ryan Leaf was a better quarterback. He was more mobile. Peyton Manning was kind of a fence post back there. He's never been mobile. But understanding which one you pick. And so that's where if you just have one college quarterback and you're betting that college quarterback, your preclinical data is going to be effective into the clinic, that's tough. And so, what a lot of this goes back to, the unforgiving piece is, how well have you thought about the risks? Are you really just betting on that one candidate, or do you have other things? Do you have 4 or 5 prospects in college that also look appealing, not just one that you're going out with?
So as I was preparing for this conversation, I looked at the data. So it appears, I didn't know this, that 6 out of 10 biotech IPOs in recent years have had first-time CEOs. So you work with different boards and investors. So what do you think boards and investors should look for when they're betting on someone who hasn't done this before?
Yeah, that was actually a fascinating statistic. You shared that with me before the call, and I was frankly surprised. But I think I'll bet you if you dig into those people, they're people that have had a lot of experience in the industry. So maybe they weren't the Russell Crowe master and commander of the vessel, but I'll bet you they were number 2s, they were number 3s. They'd spent 20 years in artillery or 15 years in, I don't know, quarterback supplies for that vessel. And so, these are people that have typically had a lot of experience. I mean, for me, even before that first time CEO role, I'd pretty much done everything: sales, marketing, product development, been a scientist, managed scientist before I took that first CEO role. And even then, it was not enough. So if I'm looking at a first-time CEO, I'm going to really ask, what else have they done? And honestly, you can be a leader. It doesn't matter what place in an organization. What have you led? What have you really been involved in that required bringing people together and leading them? So I would just look at the person and say, where have they led? Where they had demonstrated success with leadership? One of the things that I think I've learned over the years is, I gravitate toward good people, and you do need good people. You need truthful people. You need honest people. You need people that can tell you straight up, when the news looks bad, when the sailing vessel is going to be choppy, when the weather's going to be choppy. They make a good leader, and you really have to look for the demonstrated leadership. Have they brought a group of people together and then delivered on something? And I don't care if that's a CEO role or something else, but have they just continually shown that they can bring people together and drive toward a successful outcome?
So speaking of the leadership qualities and personality traits, so I sometimes advise private equity firms on biotech executive team profiles. Research shows that a CEO's behaviors and personal characteristics are correlated with a firm's performance. And narcissistic traits are usually the traits that I watch closely. So another one of your quotes really struck me, which is, building a biotech takes both insane humility and insane hubris. That's quite a paradox. So can you elaborate on this?
Yeah, I mean, it does start with insane hubris, because you have to look at, in my field, you look across cancers, and we forget this, but if you're a layperson and you get cancer, you get in your mind, I don't think people realize this, but they kind of say, oh, I've got a quote unquote cost. Are you there? Okay. What they mean by a good cancer is one where there's a lot of good drugs, and the patients can live long enough that honestly they're probably going to die of something else. Testicular cancer, a number of breast cancers, prostate cancer, a whole bunch of blood cancers now. In 2025, these were cancers. Myeloma killed you in 2000, and now you're probably going to die of something else. You have multiple myeloma, which is amazing progress. So you as a CEO of a biotech, you have to look at that and say, with all these drugs out there, I'm going to make a much better drug than what's already there. So that takes hubris, and it also takes hubris to be confident enough that you have something that's going to knock out cancer, that isn't going to knock out normal tissue. So yeah, and when you really understand what you really want to do to get a drug done. It takes hubris. And the other thing is, the typical scientist, researcher in pharma, I'm halfway through my 5 years or so fighting, and maybe I have another 25 years left. I've been involved in 2 drugs that have been successful, and then a ton of scars, a ton of things that didn't work out that all looked like pretty good sailing voyages before I started. So it takes insane hubris to say, this is good enough that we should go raise money, we should get this done, we should build a team. That's the insane hubris part. The insane humility is just, it kicks your ass. And it's cancer. I think the really good leaders, my CSO of our new stealth company, he always goes back to cancer, and he goes back to cancer being the enemy. And it isn't investors. It's not lack of money. It's not, it's not mistakes by the team. What the fundamental thing that will hit you and hit you hard is just cancer. And so you take this drug and you do your best job to have it impact cancer, and you hope it will. But it takes, kind of insane humility to realize cancer is a tough enemy, and there's going to be times when it surprises you, and you just got to do the best job you possibly can to deliver a drug that will hit it. So, and then the other thing is, of course, just, you get humility every day by just things that happen. I mean, the one thing about the CEO role that's really fascinating is that I used to tell people, you'll never have as many bosses as when you're a CEO of a biotech. And what I mean by that is there are so many people that can impact the voyage in a negative way. Great employee leaves you, you're surprised. A board member that you thought was going to behave a certain way behaves a different way. Investor wants to do this versus that. Any of your supply chain, all your CROs. So you have all of these people, maybe not bosses, but people that can impact you. So you just have a lot of things that can impact you, and all that is going to teach you humility.
So where do you draw the line between arrogance, and we see a lot of arrogant and not self-aware CEOs in biotech, with hubris? Where's the line?
I think a lot of it is putting the risks clearly right out on the table. I mean, I don't care if somebody comes across. I mean, sometimes you got to have confidence, and one person might see that as Steve's confident, and someone else might see that as Steve seems a little arrogant. Fine. But I think putting the risks out on the table and thinking through them, people are much more willing to cut through the emotion when they have a set of risks they see at every board meeting. There's 6 of them. These things are the things that can kill this voyage, or kill this drug, or turn this Peyton Manning into a Ryan Leaf. Hope Ryan's not watching this. But if you do that, then the emotion comes out of it. You're not worried about whether someone's being arrogant or confident when they say this risk isn't a problem. You can just evaluate it. And what's interesting in human nature too is if you put it right out there at the very beginning, even when you're raising money, this is a risk. We've known about this risk. This is an experiment we're going to do to get around this risk. Then you're much more willing to just talk about it in a very dispassionate way. So you'll see it every one of my quarterly board meetings. My 3rd slide is always a risk slide. And we update it and we take it very seriously. And when we do that, it's going to happen. And so you plan for that instead of just putting it out there and then saying, well, it's slide, but the likelihood is low. No. If it's on that page, it means that the management team has thought really seriously about what this risk is and how we're going to mitigate it, kind of expecting it to happen.
So let's talk about humility a little bit. So there is a dialogue in the professional community that humility can lead to unintended consequences, and people can see you as warm but less competent. So how do you show humility without undermining confidence in your leadership?
Sorry, Julian. Am I back? I think I lost you for a minute there, or you lost me.
Yes. Can you still hear me?
I can, yeah. Am I back?
Yes. Yes, you're back. So the question I was asking is if we talk a little more about humility. So some people suggest that humility can lead to unintended consequences. People may see you as warm but less competent. So how do you show humility without undermining confidence in your leadership?
You know, that's tough. I mean, it kind of goes back to good people don't always make good leaders. And you might have a good person, but too much of that humility, or at least the perception of it, can can potentially drive that. I don't think it's humility that drives people's lack of confidence. I think it's competence. So I personally have seen some amazing drug hunters that I work with that are very humble, and but they're competent, and I know that they've successfully developed drugs. So again, the emotional piece kind of goes on the side when I know that this is a very competent person. This is a drug hunter that has done it before. So I wouldn't interpret their humility as the lack of confidence or wishy-washy. So if they have the competence and the track record, they develop a drug before, they've been successful, you know, what they exude in terms of humility or not, again, is kind of secondary. That's kind of the emotion. So I think the debate about how much humility, versus confidence the CEO shows, it's just not that important if you have a competent leader that knows that people just know this person's going to execute. I don't think people are going to worry about how they exude confidence.
You build teams, and you mentioned that there is one key thing that separates elite drug hunters from everybody else. So what is it?
Yeah, and I'm not a drug hunter. I mean, but I have worked with drug hunters my whole career, and my very first one that I knew was a guy named Dr. Tony Allison. He was an MD, PhD from South Africa, and he had developed Cellcept he actually birth control pill first in Mexico City, and then they fled to the Bay Area, and it was really the start of the Bay Area biotech. Incredible story from the 70s and 80s in Palo Alto. And then he did Cellcept, which is still one of the most widely used immunosuppressive drugs in the world. It's now gone generic, and it's given for nothing all over the world. But that was Roche's biggest seller. That's why Roche bought them. When I met him, humble guy, but he was on his third drug. This was 1999. I was wet behind the ears, first biotech. And the thing that separates drug hunters is they've done it before. And again, the studies show, they can be confident, they can be humble, they can be any different flavor. Maybe they're a chemist, maybe they're a biologist, but they've done it before. And that's the best way to predict, when you have a good drug hunter, they've done it before.
And what about the team size? So I think we saw the news last week or 2 weeks ago. I will not mention the company name, but they announced that they have a leadership team of 20 senior celebrity executives. And I was wondering, where did they get the money from, and how did the board allow this to happen? So as you build the team for the startup, how do you avoid becoming bloated versus being too lean to execute?
Go back to sports analogies, and maybe, basketball is a good one because it's so intimate. How many players do you have out on the floor at a given time? You've got 5. The point guard, if you're a preclinical company, the point guard is your chief science officer. He's got the basketball, he's feeding, how many people is he feeding? About 4 or 5. There's some replacements, maybe it's 10 total. If you're a clinical company, that point guard becomes your chief medical officer. How big is that team? It's not 20, it's not 30. So there's a wonderful article written by RA Capital, and I probably find it after the interview, about what is the right size for a biotech. And, a biotech defined by a company that has, assets in the clinic, but ultimately probably will be acquired before they really commercialize. And I think it's around 10 to 20. We're in stealth mode, we're fully funded. We have 10 employees, virtual company, And that's about right. It feels like an NBA. In fact, if you think about it, sometimes I feel like I'm like Mark Cuban on the sidelines, and just, my job is to stay on the sidelines. But the basketball team, the real players, the scientists that are advancing these drugs, it's 5, 10, 15-ish players. And then the trick is to keep the money. I joke, Julian, with my investors, I said, look, I'm going to make every cent count. I'm going to spend it all on drugs. Which maybe isn't good if you're talking to the American family room, but it really resonates, I think, with biotech investors, because the cheese has moved. I mean, the days of having nice gleaming buildings, and if you have a building, then you have 3 people have to manage the building, and then you got compliant, you got just a lot of other people that come on board. So we spend all our money on drugs, and then that just kind of limits it. But again, limiting the number of people that are on the sidelines helping the team. Are you putting every dollar into the people playing basketball? That's, if you're going to win in the NBA, you better spend out on the salaries, and you better bring them Gatorade, you better feed them, you better make sure that they have what they need, but spend all the money on those players to make sure that they're playing the best basketball they possibly can. And everybody on the sidelines, again, kind of back to humility, is in a support role. And I don't care what C title you might give them, they are in a support role to make sure that the people on the court are playing the best basketball they can with the best players they can. So 10 people maybe when you're early before the clinic, maybe 20, 30 when you get into the clinic. But I mean, for me, we track exactly how much money we have spent to date, and trying to get the drugs as far as possible with the least amount of spend. And that goes back to having the right size team.
So we're currently in a very tough funding environment in 2025. Has this environment changed your approach to team size, or you stick to your approach?
I've just been even more careful about who we hire and keeping the team right sized. So I would say, you can, nobody is as stupid as all of us. The more people you have in a room making a decision, the dumber your decision can be. So you keep the team small. If you're, again, back to basketball analogy, if you've got 5 players making a decision, that's very different than you bring in all the people from the stands, let them chime in, so keeping the team small, you get better decisions. So I'm still, a big fan of it. It's a very high bar, frankly, to be an employee in this stealth company we're doing, and we keep it that way deliberately.
I'm not a sports person, so I really appreciate your references today. So let's talk about building the board for a minute. I've seen all kinds of approaches here. Some folks go after the biotech celebrities, the big names, but often they just become dead weight rather than actually helping you move forward. Then you get companies that pick board members specifically to look attractive to investors. So what is one thing that you look for in your board?
So the first thing is, just like I look for in biotech employees, you can be a big name, you can be from a big pharma, but you have to have spent time recently in biotech. The best kind of person to work with, whether it's a board or an employee or scientist, is someone who spent 5, maybe 10 years at a large pharma getting really good training, but then they have gone to multiple biotechs, and they've seen and they know exactly how to execute biotech. So it's people that can get stuff done by themselves. And the board members are like that incredible thing with one phone call. And you want those kinds of people. When I build a board, I am very deliberately thinking about, for this particular voyage, again, think of Russell Crowe out going and, out for 2 or 3 years, right out in the ocean to have a, an investor funded initiative and hopefully a successful voyage. What do I not know? And that's I like to have on my board. So my board chair for the stealth company is one of the most successful San Diego-based M&A guys. He's got like $15 billion of transactions of 4 different biotechs, kind of got a golden touch with M&A. I mean, I don't know that, but he does. And so I know that I have that expertise when I need it. But he's thinking backwards about what is pharma like and not like about a particular asset that we're building. So he's already kind of thinking working backwards. So that person is amazing as my board chair. I have another person who's brilliant in finance. He's won a whole lot of awards from the financial side. That's an area I don't know well enough. I said in my background, I didn't really even though I had an MBA, and a PhD early on, I really never had real exposure to finance. So having a board member that I know backstops me. So I like to have board members that bring skills I do not have. And that is really helpful, when I'm thinking about building a board.
And what do you think is the biggest mistake that you see other biotech companies make with their boards?
I have a little connection here. I'm gonna flip to a different connection. Flip me back for a minute. There, is that better? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Julian. You asked the question was what's the biggest mistake?
Yeah. So the question is, what's the biggest mistake that you see? Yes, if we look at your, let's say, competitors, so what is the biggest mistake that you see these biotech startups make with their boards?
Too big, not relevant, famous people that haven't, again, back to leadership. Famous people are great if they have consistently brought teams together and delivered on things and can help me do that, then they're the right board member. But, I think they all fight every day and I have distractions. Again, it kind of goes back to I'll use the basketball example again. Like it's really easy. You're sitting in the stands as, Mark Cuban, and you come out on the floor yourself. That distracts the team. So putting in board members that are going to distract the company from what they're trying to do. It's not about the board. It's about those people playing basketball. It's about the scientists, the drug hunters you have that are going to invent the next drug. And so is everything that you build in your company focused to helping that team on the floor develop better drugs? And that goes for board members too. And it's really easy to, who cares that up in the stands is another board member who's amazing? Is that really going to, wouldn't you rather have the money spent on a better NBA player that's going to, I'm a Phoenix Suns fan, believe me, I know about wishing we had some more players to back up Devin Booker, but it's about spending money on the players, about spending money on the drug hunters.
So let's talk about the business strategy. I know that we have founders listening to this podcast right now who are wrestling with this question: should we go brick and mortar or virtual? And you have a very strong perspective that there's no middle ground here. You've got to pick one. So walk me through your thinking on that.
This is a really important dialogue, and I don't want to be pedant, too overbearing in my answer, because I do have a very strong opinion here. And granted, it depends a lot on what you're trying to do. My last company, we were doing an oncolytic virus, and it required a lot of people with very specialized skills in a certain virus. So we had 29 people in Phoenix that were, were basically a lot of viral engineers, and that was brick and mortar. We had a lab. I had a C-suite mostly from San Diego, and they would come in because you just can't get the C-level talent at that time in Arizona. So I had director level and down in Arizona. So that mission, it just, I was constrained by having to have our own lab because there was no contract research organization that could have done this. This time around, though, we're doing some really amazing things kind of in small molecule, antibody drug conjugates, antibody area. I don't want to talk too much about our particular technical approach, but we're able to leverage a lot of outside labs. So my feeling is you have to either decide to be butts and seats, where it's kind of back to the 90s, people come in and, you drive in and everyone's kind of together, brick and mortar, old school, or you go 100% virtual. Where it starts to break down is when you do a hybrid. And what happens, and the way it typically happens is you start virtual, and then at some point you say, hey, we need our own lab. Well, guess what? Those people in the lab, they have to drive in every day. So they don't really care that these virtual people flew in Tuesday night and want to all go hang out. These are people that are in the lab every day. So you get this dichotomy, almost like two levels of citizenship, where this set of employees gets to be in gets to kind of fly in, work from home, and then this other set of employees that every coming in, they're 9 to 5, things are fixed, and at Tuesday night they don't want to just go hang out as a team, they have things they have to do at home because it's a regular 9 to 5. So I think it actually is very difficult to manage a hybrid organization. People fly in and then other people aren't even there. So I'd much rather either embrace 100% brick and mortar or go 100% virtual. Our approach with virtual is we have just an insanely talented team that has, between us, is 10 employees, and we counted it up. We have 12 approved drugs somewhere in our CVs from that 10 people. So they've won a few basketball games, and so by being 100% virtual, you can do that. And there's a lot of very active management we have to do. We get people together. We have these breakout sessions, monthly or quarterly, where people are together and just giving people time so they know what other people do. They're listening to each other, they're talking. But most of the work we get done is basically on very effective work, either individual work or Zoom calls that are going on all the time, and they don't require people flying one place to another.
And I know that you are involved in risk management in your biotech. Most companies approach risk management as compliance, but we both know that this is so much broader. So when I'm helping executive teams map out their risk profile, the executive team itself is always one of my top categories. And you told me something once that really made me think. You said, what the executive team hasn't done before will hurt you. I think we might actually disagree on this one, but I want to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I have another pot shot that I say pretty regularly, which is that the only thing in biology that ever works the first time is something you've done before. And that's the constant pull with entrepreneurship, because if you're going to guarantee someone's going to do something really well, you get somebody that's done the same thing again and again and again. Think about free throw shooting, right? It's so repetitive that you nail it, right? But a good entrepreneurs get bored with that. That's not why we don't get up in the morning and do something we've done before. We get up in the morning and do something totally different. But what I've seen is that you can pretty much predict where you're going to have unforeseen bad news happen based on where the management team doesn't have prior experience in that area. And I think if you're coming from the outside into drug development, it kind of all seems like the same activities, just but the truth is, like, an oncology drug is totally different from a diabetes drug. I mean, just massively different. All I've done in 25 years is cancer, and I did a little bit of forays into autoimmune, and it was very humbling to realize, like, I don't know what's going on at that poker table. I'm always the sucker at that poker table. And so one is, like, do you already know the area oncology? Does the whole team know the area oncology, or is your manufacturing person coming in from a different area? Is your medical officer, have they done that particular area? Have they done colon cancer, or are they coming in? Even there, the difference between breast cancer and colon cancer is massive. If you're doing a pediatric trial, has your CMO done pediatric trial before? So what you don't know will really hurt you, and it hurts you because you don't know that you don't know it. And so, a really good exercise, Julian, you probably do this when you're in your coaching, is to think through the voyage ahead and say, okay, let's say you're doing a pediatric trial in brain cancers. And more importantly, what modality is it? So you're doing a pediatric trial on brain cancers and you're doing a small molecule. Well, the CSO is really an antibody expert and hasn't done as much small molecules. That's going to hurt you. That is going to hurt you because you're going to be going up against other people where the CSO is 25 years of small molecule experience. So, does your medical office already have experience in pediatrics? Does a team have a ton of experience in brain cancer work? So the areas where you can look at the team and you can say, well, you haven't done that before. And what do first of all, are you aware that this is different from your last voyage? And so you're not making assumptions. And I've done it. I mean, you take whatever you did at your last company in biotech and you kind of apply that subconsciously without thinking about it, assuming it's kind of going to be the same in this one. And then it just often isn't. So it's a really good exercise. Again, when you're thinking ahead of time about risk, is to think about, what are we going to encounter in this 3-year voyage that is different than what we've done before? And is there something that we just don't know? And that's where, a good consultant, maybe an additional board member you may need could supplement that. And, so you get the person that has done exactly that before, when you need them.
So if we connect this topic to the previous conversation around the board, how do you communicate risk to your board and investors?
Yeah. So every quarter, my board slides, first slide is an alignment. It's a narrative alignment slide. It's kind of like in the elevator, you're talking to your board members and you're saying, this is what we're doing in the next 2 quarters, next few years. And if it isn't on that first slide, then we're not doing it. So you just kind of, it's a deliberate written narrative slide. And that's been a great, for alignment with the board and management team, just so we're all on the same page what we're doing. The next slide is the elephant slide, and that comes from just some great work that RA Capital did actually on that. It was called the elephant slide, and it's basically, when are we going to run out of money? And you're always that's the elephant in the room when you're out of money. So that's a money slide. It's really like, where are the milestones? How far is the money going to take us? And so we call it the elephant slide. But the third slide is my risk slide. And the team spends a lot of time thinking about that. If it's on that slide, it means it's bad enough that it can really hurt you. And we're thinking about how to mitigate it and taking those risks seriously. I had a board member say, Steve, that's really negative. Like, we've invested to cure cancer. We want to see these drugs get developed, like some of the teams done before. So I added a accelerator slide after the risk slide, and that's really like the upside things that are also unexpected. Pharma company wants to do serious partnership. Your third drug is like way better than you thought. These are all accelerator things. So I do have a positive slide, which is the accelerators. And those also you have to think about too. But the problem, Julian, with the risk slide, and I ask, it's a question I ask at every board meeting is, and for the team as well, is what risk is not on this slide? Because that's the one that really hurts you. The one you just, you're Russell Crowe out there, and you just didn't realize that there was a French warship that right behind you, and that's not on your risk slide. So you do, even as you build that, you still have to sit back and say, all right, that's great, but what else here, have we not thought about?
So let's talk about the business strategy and risk planning, because part of the risk planning is also figuring out whether to license technology from universities or not.
Yeah.
And I know that for newly minted CEOs who are looking at this path, they need to be thinking of some gotchas and pitfalls. So tell us more about that.
There's a lot of risk in licensing from universities. And ironically, probably the more famous, the more risk. There's probably and I'm a physics guy. I'm a data guy. I'm kind of known as being a data guy, but I could think of a nice line of risk on the y-axis and famous university on the x-axis. Probably goes same thing with board members, same thing with contract research organizations. But sometimes you don't really suss out the technology the more famous they are, and you can get badly burned. There's just a difference with an academic moving along a new technology to get publications. They typically publish one time, whereas we don't really consider it's a result until we tested it twice. We might even do it at 2 different locations before we're really sure. And that is just not how the academic mind works. So you get in this nasty situation where you go look for a new technology. You might have diligenced 100 different technologies. You find this great one from famous university, famous cancer researcher, and you start to believe, and then you fundamentally believe in that. But typically you start to believe in that data before you've spent the money to have it done, repeated at a contract research organization, because that's expensive. And honestly too, and who's going to do that before you have the deal in place? So, and then I start to have conviction. I then go raise money. I build a conviction with my investors. And a year, maybe even 2 years goes by before I've truly reproduced all that data from an academic setting that wasn't run by people who were trying to get their dissertation done and were working around, the semester clock. Maybe they were postdocs, and they just do not have the same kind of level of reproducible work that you see at these contract research organizations. So it's a real trap, because then if you reproduce the data and it isn't what you said, then I have this huge mismatch between the belief I previously had in the academic data versus what the data is really reading out when I did it again at a contract research organization. And then I say, well, then now what do I do? And I've also spent, sometimes it's hundreds of thousands of dollars of legal fees trying to get that licensed in. So it breeds a false sense of confidence by the investor. They say, well, we've licensed this amazing thing from Ivy League, university and top cancer person. But it really, you got to be really careful with a false sense of confidence. And has that really already been? Have you reproduced that data at a a non-emotional, no skin in the game contract research organization? What we're doing in our stealth company, and again, we have a luxury because we have I don't think I have a single person on the team that has less than 10, 15 years of drug development experience. Is we're starting with all of our own intellectual property. So these are all drugs that we're inventing. We control how we write the intellectual property, the patents, and we control when we do it. And it's just a lot cleaner. And again, you save money. Back to spend every penny on drugs. I'm not spending the money to have a university write a patent for me.
And from the deal structure perspective, are there deal structures that work better than others?
Yeah, there are. I mean, I think the more optionality you can build in to the deal structure, so and push out some of the legal things. So typically getting an option, a lightweight. The universities have learned this too. Is a very lightweight option that gives me 6 months to a year to really reproduce the data, and then I'm not spending. So you push out some of the negotiating terms typically by just doing a very lightweight option. But then I also know the university isn't going to license it to somebody else while I'm trying to really suss out if they have they truly have this amazing new compound or this antibody. So I would say just doing a lightweight option agreement and then saving, because it's going to cost you a couple $100,000 to do a good full license out of a university per compound, and then also spending a lot of time thinking about, are you getting a family of compounds or are you just getting one, and how does it work if you need the original university person involved and they're going to have new ideas? Is it going to go into your company, or is this inventor the university going to go start another company, which is going to cause problems? So it comes down to people, but there are certainly some things that can help you with how you think about the deal, and paying attention to comps. I mean, any of the good biotech legal firms, the first thing you should ask them is, let's go through your comps, so you have a really good idea of how this particular molecule, antibody, oncolytic virus platform, whatever it is, compares with milestones, points later, money up front. So you're really well armed with that. So having really good comps and showing the comps to the universities, because a lot of times they are completely out to lunch with their expectations with what they really think their technology is worth, and you haven't even checked to see that it works in another lab.
So you've got another line that I really want to share with the audience. You mentioned earlier that it's 2025 and the biotech cheese has moved. We can't waste a cent. So where's the cheese now?
Yeah, well, can't waste a cent, spend it all on drugs. But I've been kind of drug reluctantly into the policy area. I'm not a policy guy, but I lived firsthand in 2023 the damage that the Inflation Reduction Act caused to small molecule drug development for the Medicare population. It's a no-brainer. It's basically the government telling investors, you're going to make half as much. My father that wants a better osteosis pill instead of an injection, he's not going to get it because of that. So it was investors behaving very rationally. But these are things that are causing the real damage to the biotech ecosystem. That's one. There's others, the MFN discussions. I mean, it just shows a total lack of awareness for how important pharmaceutical drug development is. This is an American industry, and we should be proud of what we're doing. And instead, we're doing everything we possibly can to undermine, the industry. And meanwhile, we have a competitor, in China that is really open arms, embracing it. They've done, and with a society, with a government behind, 100% behind them, instead of what we see in the U.S., which is oftentimes government legislation crippling innovation. So there are a lot of headwinds. I've kind of been an amateur politician. There's the cheese has moved, and if you think that you can raise money and spend half of it on stuff that isn't just playing basketball and isn't on your basketball players, you're crazy.
So what are you not spending money on today that companies used to spend money on 5 years ago?
Well, no industry licensing. That's easily a couple $100,000 per compound, plus the time and the waste involved. No building. A really good thought process for how we partner with contract research organizations. That saves money. And then killing things off sooner too. You can. The challenge is that at large pharma, they have 50 programs, and most of their people's jobs are just to kill things every day. You've got 50 Ryan Leafs or Peyton Mannings in your college quarterback stall, and you're going to decide which of those you're going to put in the clinic, which one might make the NFL. Their job is just to kill things. Well, in a biotech, if you're not careful, you only have one. And so guess what your job becomes? Just make Ryan Leaf look as good as he possibly can, into the NFL, stage. And so this is why, again, you have to have the ability to kill compounds, but you also have to kind of structure your company so it's easy to have multiple programs so you can cull things earlier. That saves a lot of money if you can do that. But you do have to set up your biotech with a little bit more like the pharma thinking, where you have multiple, you got multiple college prospects, and you might have 10, and you're okay with moving it down to 3 or even that's kind of how you structure the company that way.
All right. Well, before you return to the policy event, I want to end with a curveball that I prepared for you. What is one mistake you've made as a CEO that you would actually make again?
I don't know if it's a mistake, but you have to go after the really tough cancer areas. And you have to, in my opinion, it can't be Me Too's. I've done my job if I talk to an investor and I say, we're doing this particular program, and I tell them what the mechanism of action is under CDA, and they've never heard of it, and they have to Google it. I've done my job. But if I tell them I'm doing a PD-L1 VEGF combo, and they're like, that's great, there's already 70 of those, you could be 71, I haven't done my job. So yes, is it risky? Of course, but I'm going to keep making that mistake every time. Patients deserve our courage. Patients deserve us taking big risks on new mechanisms that people have to Google because they haven't heard of them before.
Well, that's a great place to leave it. And my major takeaway from this conversation is that I need to watch more basketball before our next conversation. Well,
I'm not a basketball player, but I do like the analogy.
All right, Steve. Well, thank you so much for always being so candid with me, and I appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Julian.